Hi, this is Robin, and in this video workshop, I'm going to be talking about and demonstrating how to add realistic-looking rim light to images in Photoshop. So before we start, I just thought we should all be on the same page with regard to what is rim light. So rim lighting is backlighting of a subject that visibly highlights the contours of the subject and separates it from its background. Now, with rim light, you can suggest dimension and depth in an image or separate dark areas of an image from a shadowy background. So it really is helpful, as I said, as a differentiator. You can use rim light on subjects or objects, as you can see in these images here. It doesn't matter. So it is useful in portraits, macro photography, product photography, still lifes, and even things like illustrations and text for those of you who might do more digital art. So it could be useful for all those different instances. Now, sometimes rim light is used or called by different names, such as hair light, edge light, kicker light, or even a halo. Some of those terms actually are a little bit different in terms of what they do or how they present, but they may be used interchangeably as terms. So I pulled some examples just to show you different styles of rim light. So as you can see, we have this harsh, thin, literally a rim around the contours of his body. Her rim light around her hair is more, as I said, that term, that's the hair light, so it comes more into the subject and it's a little bit softer. As I said, you don't have to limit it to just being used on people, and it doesn't have to just be for studio shots. So here this little calf certainly has rim light backlighting around behind him or her. And then here it's been used for product photography to give it a little bit more dramatic look and to set it off against its background. So tabletop photography also can use rim lighting. Now, what I would suggest is I just pulled these as something to set context and say, this is what I think of as rim light, and what we're going to try to create are things that have this kind of a look to them if they did not start with any rim light. So this is starting from scratch and creating a faux or fake rim light in this video, not enhancing an existing rim light. So what I would suggest that you do if you want to try to create rim light is do the same thing I did here. Do some research, collect some samples of different types of rim lighting styles, and then use those as reference when you create the fake rim light. So if you're going for a realistic rim light look, then you have something to give you a sense of what looks realistic. If you want to go surreal or very stylized, then you just do what you want and give it a very unique, creative look. Okay, so these were the examples I wanted to show you, and I want to show you one more thing here by way of introduction before we get into the demos. So let me just close these. Okay, now what I put together was a lighting diagram. So if you as a photographer were going to be setting up a shoot, you might do a design something like this to say where you want to place your lights and your subject and your camera. So I just wanted to give you a sense of what, if you were actually capturing rim light in camera, what the setup would be, even if you're only going to create it in Photoshop. So here is the subject in the center, and FYI, just so I don't keep saying subject and object throughout the whole video, just remember that you can use rim lighting interchangeably on either people or animals or inanimate objects, but I'll just call it subject collectively to keep the words down. So we have our subject against a backdrop. Here's the camera. this is a 3-light setup. Over here, about 45 degrees from the subject, is the key light, or the main light that's lighting the subject. Here is where your rim light would be placed. So behind your subject at, again, about a 45-degree angle. And in a case of a person, you probably would place that rim light about head or shoulder height. So again, think about it if that's where it would be for a person. If you're doing a tabletop sort of rim lighting, then you'd keep it sort of towards the top of whatever is on the tabletop, okay? And again, notice here the rim light is on the same side as the key light. So same side of the setup. So they could both be on the opposite side here, but they would be on the same site. So think about that when you're creating your faked rim light, as to where the rim light would be coming from relative to how your subject is already lit, and where it's the direction its main light is coming from. Now in this setup, we have a third light over here as fill light, just to sort of take some of the shadows away with the umbrella. You could have a reflector over here that wasn't a light. But I think the main point was to say, when you do the faking, keep your rim light and your key light positioned on the same side of your subject. Okay, so this is not a photography lesson, but it's more for the logic of what to do in Photoshop when you're doing the post-processing. So what I'm going to cover in this workshop is this brief introduction. Then I will do 3 step-by-step demos showing 3 different methods of how to create rim light in Photoshop when you have none in your starting image. And then I'll also show, I think it's in a couple of the demos, how to color tone a rim light to match with a background, either an actual background or one that you have composited in. What I will do is, because again, what I put together with these workshops are classes. They're not 30-second loops. So if you don't want to sit and watch it all in one sitting, I will put the start times for each of the chapters, in other words, each of the demos, in the description below the video. And that way you can hop around, or if you want to revisit something, you have the convenience of just clicking on the link and going to that part of the video. One more housekeeping thing, and that's with regard to YouTube subscription. So if you have already subscribed to my channel, there's no need to do anything. You are all set. If you're new and you would like to get a notification from YouTube when I post new content, then please click the free subscribe button and the black bell icon below this video, and YouTube will alert you when I post new content. I do have a mix of Photoshop related how-to playlist categories on my channel, so if you want to browse around, you can. And I do release free Photoshop workshops each month. So I am going to pause the video for a moment and get set up for demo number 1, in which I will show how to create rim light using an inner glow layer style. So hold on for a moment. This is demo number 1. And in demo number 1, I'm going to show how to create a rim light using the inner glow layer style. Now, I just want to comment, the 3 images that I'm going to be working with are all stock photography, and they come from the Pexels stock site. So that's P-E-X-E-L-S. I've had a request in the past to try to include links to the images I'm using. As I've said, I'm limited to what the licensing rights are, but I will include the links to these 3 images, but I do have a proviso for you in that for a couple of them, I have modified them so that they would work well for rim lighting. So if you do want to work with the same images, you may have to modify them to look like mine look in this presentation and in this workshop. But if you want to use your own images, that's perfectly fine too. Okay, so here we have this model on outdoors on a nighttime street. And I always like to say sort of step zero before you start getting into the post-processing is to just chill for a moment, look over your image and say, analyze it and say, okay, what do I want to achieve here? What am I looking at? What is going to make sense for whatever post-processing I'm going to do? But because we're doing rim light, let's look at it in that context. So we do have a dark street here. There are lights, street lights of various sorts behind her that are going to be acting as the backlighting. We also have what looks like a damp or a wet after a rainy kind of a street that will be then reflecting up the lights that are in the ambient light back up onto her. So the rim lighting will be following along the contours of her body is the idea, because look at, she has some shadows here. Certainly the direction of the key light or the main light, as I mentioned in the introduction, is clearly coming from this direction. So that means that the rim light is also going to be coming from that same sort of direction from the back. Okay, and what else do we notice when we look at this image, and what will you notice when you look at your image? Because it's a nighttime scene and because of the nature of the lights, it's very cool toned. There are a lot of blues in the scene that are also being reflected up onto her. So what that tells me is that not only do I need to add some rim light to differentiate her and to have it be appropriate for this backlighting that's back here, but also I want to try to color tone that rim light so it has some of the cool blue tones that would realistically be reflected from the scene onto her. Okay, so with that analysis out of the way, let's get started on how to create the rim light with the inner glow layer style. So first thing I always say is over on the right hand side of the interface in the layers panel, duplicate your background layer and work on a copy. So you can either drag this, left click and drag to the bottom of the layers panel to the box with the plus, which is the add new layer icon, to get a copy, or on that background layer you can do a control or command and J to jump it up. Okay, so we're going to work on the copy once that is taken care of. All right, so now the next thing we want to do, second step, is to select the subject and again jump that subject onto its own layer. So obviously the subject is this model here. I don't have other really significant subjects, so Photoshop is not going to get confused if I want to use one of the automated tools. So I am going to come to the toolbar. Mine is docked right here. Yours might be on the left. And I'm going to come down to the Object Selection tool, which is this box with the arrow going into it, and click on that so you see the black behind it. You know it's active. You can use any of the selection tools for what I'm going to say. You could use the Quick Selection tool too to have it active. Either one will work. So with that active, I'm going to come to the top of the interface and I'm going to click on Select Subject and let Photoshop think and do its thing. And you can see that now Photoshop has auto-generated a subject selection of marching ants around my subject. I always recommend that with these automated selections, you just look over your image and make sure it's done an accurate selection. Even if these tools are getting better and better, sometimes they just don't see everything. So you can fix it with something like the Quick Selection tool if you need to. All right, that looks pretty good to me. So now, as I said, I want to jump this selection and this model up onto her own layer. And I just said a moment ago, to do that, you can do a control or command and J to jump. All right, and I'm going to put this lasso as my neutral tool, so I always go back to it. Let me just turn off the eye icons and these lower layers so you can see now that this model is on her own empty or transparent layer. So anywhere you see these white and gray boxes, that means it's transparency. So anything lower in the layers stack will show through where there's transparency, and wherever there's a solid subject, nothing will show through in those parts. Okay, so I'm going to put the eyes back on. We're on this layer. Let me just call this the model with beret, so we know, keep track of which layers. I like to label my layers so I know where I am here. Okay, so now that we have this subject on its own layer, we want to go to the Layer Styles dialog box. So there's three ways to get to the Inner Glow layer style. So I will show you, and then you can pick or choose the one that you prefer to work with. The first one appears at the top of the interface in the layer menu. You can click on that and come down to where it says layer style, and then come to the flyout and come down to where it says inner glow. So layer menu, layer style, inner glow. That's one option. I don't typically do that because it's like so much back and forth. I don't want to exert too much energy here. All right. The second way to get to that layers panel or that layer style panel is bottom of the layers panel. Yours might be at the bottom. I keep mine at the top for easier visibility for me. So come to the bottom of the layers panel to where you see that little FX, and you can left click on that. You get another pop-up, and again come to where it says inner glow. So that's option number 2 to get to the inner glow layer style. And then the final one, which is usually what I do because then I'm just staying right here, is you can double click to the right of that label on that active layer with your subject, and you get this layer style dialog box that comes up. Down the left are the various layer styles, and we're going to work with inner glow. So don't just click on the little box in front, just click over in this box here. Now you'll notice as soon as I did that, it put a glow effect around my subject, and then it also brought up some options or tools that we can use to make enhancements or adjustments as to how we want the inner glow, and you can know you're in the right place if it says inner glow there, to appear. So you can see there are 3 categories of adjustments we can make to the inner glow. There's structure, elements, and quality. So I'm just going to go down these and explain what each of them does, and then you can experiment with them on your own for your image that you're working with. So the first one here under structure is blend mode. And as you know, in Photoshop, the blend modes, help 2 layers to sort of interact with each other, or 2 features to interact with each other. So this blend mode is going to let the glow interact with your image. Now it comes up on screen for the inner glow, but I would suggest that you could try either screen, or if you go to this little down arrow, linear dodge, and see which of those you prefer for your image. But I'm going to just leave mine on the screen that came out. So you can experiment. I mean, there's no law that says you have to do just what's recommended. Okay, the next thing we come to is this opacity slider. So this is the opacity of the glow. Now, I usually like to start it, even though it comes up at a certain place, at 100%, and then adjust it down from there. So you can see, look at how intense it has made the opacity of the glow by putting that opacity slider up at 100%. You go as subtle or as intense as you want for whatever effect you want to achieve. You saw in my first sample image in the intro how intense that rim-like glow was. That was really intended to be a very statement-y kind of thing for that rim-like glow. So you can adjust it from there. Okay, so I'm just going to start pulling this slider to the left, and you don't have to watch because this is not a formula. You're gonna have to do it for your own image. Just start sliding it and see what happens, and you can see it gets a lot more subtle to almost nothing, down to nothing. So for my particular image, I think I'm going to err on the side of more than I would typically do to taste, just to be sure that you can see it okay in the video. So I'm going to leave mine, I don't know, maybe just a little bit more down than from that, around 60%. Okay, so we can obviously see that a rim light has been added to her. The next category of slider under structure is noise. This is an optional thing. You don't have to add noise, but if you want to add a little texture to this, then you can do that. Typically, if I use noise, I keep it to 0 to 3% in that kind of range. I keep it very low. So maybe I'll just put this at around 2% and just leave it there. Okay, the next choice we have under structure for inner glow is the color of the rim light. All right, so this box here, which is a color picker, shows you the current color is a blue. So why don't I just double click? So you can double click on that color picker box. And if you want your rim light to be white, for instance, sort of still on the gray, you can click. So you can click anywhere in this color picker and choose the color you want. Now, let's say you want some color other than blue. So just drag these little handles up and down till you get to a color family that you want, and then you can click anywhere you want. What it will do is when you click, it will put what you currently had this set to and what you have just clicked on to change from. Okay, so let me go back to the blues, because as I said, that's why I said to analyze your image. The lights that are in the background here and that will be reflecting onto her are in this bluish, cyanish kind of range. So I'm going to go back up into that kind of a range. I'm going to go right about here. And then I'm going to click somewhere on it a little less white, a little more blue. Okay, so I want it to be, so as you can see, it's darker, lighter, more saturated, less saturated. So just go where you like. Click OK once you get the color the way you like, and it'll show your color of your rim light right there in the box. This is if you want to use a gradient for your rim light. I don't typically work with that, so I'm only going to show you what I work with, but you can experiment with that if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to stop there with the solid color rim light. So then we get down to the elements category of adjustments, and the first thing that you can adjust is the technique that's used for the inner glow. And if you click on this little arrow, you'll see that there are two options, softer and precise. And softer will give you a more subtle kind of a rim light, and precise, you can just click on it. You can see if you look at the difference. So just watch the image. There's softer and there's precise. So precise is definitely a more solid, a more intense, a more defined kind of a line. It's also, thinking about the word precise, good if you have very intricate edges and shapes that you want the inner glow to follow. So use that precise if you want either a more pronounced glow or if you want it to fit into more nooks and crannies than what I have on this particular image here. So again, experiment and see what you like the look of. The next thing that we have here is the source. So again, because we're talking about rim lighting, we don't want to go in the center of the image. Just click on edge to make sure that edge, it has the little dot in front of it there. Now, I know I've been going in order, but typically what I do is I set size before I go to choke. So I'm going to hop down and skip over choke and go to size. Size is the size of the inner glow. So let me just, so watch the image again and not the slider, because again, none of this is formulaic. You're going to have to slide it to where you like. So you can just see to the left is a smaller size, to the right is a bigger size, and you can see how it behaves. So let me see where I want to put mine. That's actually not bad. All right, again, I'm going to err on the side of more than I might do normally, just so I'm sure that you can see what's happening with the inner glow on the video. But for my own taste, just so you'd know, I'd have it be more subtle than this. Okay, and then coming back to choke, choke is, it fades at the edges. So if the choke is low, again, watch the image, it's more faded or more transitional. And if it's all the way up, it's more solid. So I typically, again, if I'm trying to make it realistic versus statement-y or stylized, I keep it kind of low. So I think I'll just keep mine at 0 for this particular image. All right, and then the final category of settings for this inner glow layer style is quality. And the first thing that we come to here is called the contour. And the contour is the shape of the lighting effects, shadows, and glows curve that's being used. And you can see that I use and recommend that you use having anti-aliased checked to on, because that will smooth the edges and get rid of sort of the jaggy pixels on the edges. So if you want jaggies, then turn it off. If you want it to be more smooth, then be sure the anti-aliased is on. So let's just click on the down arrow and look at the different contours that are available. So these are the different options, and you can click on each one of them individually. And again, I'm just clicking across the row, so you don't need to watch what I'm doing, but watch how it affects the inner glow with the different shapes, the different curves. Okay, so you can see it definitely, there's different looks there, and these are ones that came with Photoshop. So just as I went through, I think one I'm going to choose for mine is this half round one as I clicked past it. So once you click on it, then you can just click over in here and it'll close that box. And you can see it put the contour that I selected here as a thumbnail. You can set the range for that contour with this slider here, and the lower it is, the harder the glow. The higher it is, the softer the glow, or the more subtle. So again, you figure out where on that spectrum of that slider that you want yours. I'm going to keep mine, I think, skewed a little softer, so I'm going to keep that there. And then the final category here of adjustments is jitter. Jitter only applies to this gradient if you use the gradient for the inner glow, so I'm not going to adjust that at all since I'm working with the solid color. One other thing to show you here, if you really want to dig in even more, if you click on this contour thumbnail, what it does is it pops up this contour editor, and this would work just like a normal curve. So you can click on any of these little boxes, little dots, whatever you want to call them, points on the curve, and you can just drag them up or down or across or wherever you want, just like you would with a normal curve, to create your own custom curve. So if you want to play with that, you can. If you create a curve that you like, and let's say you shot a whole series of this model in this scene in different poses, whatever, and you want to add rim lights to all of them, or you even had another model that you used in the same scene, and you want to have them look like they have consistent rim lighting because it's in the same light, then once you get, if you're not going to use one of the standard curves, you can create your custom curve or contour, and then you can save it with a name that you give it. And then when you want to use it, you would just click on load and then choose your custom contour. So I'm going to cancel that because we're not going to do that. So once you get these different categories set OK, then click OK to accept that and send it back to the layers panel again. Now, what do you see if we look over here in the layers panel is changed? We had originally just this model on an empty layer that was all by itself, but by creating that layer style with an inner glow rim light, we have now generated two sub layers under effects and inner glow. Now, let's say you get it back here and you step away, or you just want to kind of clear your mind and then come back and look at it again, and you say, you know, I didn't do that just quite right, or I was too intense, or it was not subtle enough, or whatever you want to. You can double click on inner glow or effects, and it'll take you right back into this layer style dialog, and you can make the adjustments you want to make or modifications you want to make to your settings, and then click OK. I'm going to click cancel since I'm not going to make any changes. So just know that once you get those sub layers, you can go back in and make modifications if you want to. Now, with these settings already set, saying, okay, now we're at the point where we like how the rim light looks on this, we're going to right-click right adjacent to those words inner glow, right-click there, and it brings up this menu, and we're going to choose, let's see, where is it? Create layer here, create layer. So come down almost all the way to the bottom, after you click right on that next to inner glow and choose create layer and left click. And now again, if you look here in the layers panel, it's changed again with regard to how it looks. So now we have our model back on, or our subject back on its own layer. And what that has done by doing the create layer is put your layer style up onto its own layer. So now they are separated, and you have the ability to make further modifications to the rim light without impacting the subject, which is great. It gives you a lot of flexibility. Okay, so now the other thing to notice here is that these two layers are linked, so they know they must work together. See this little down arrow right here inside my green highlighter? That shows that this layer with the inner glow is clipped or linked to the layer below. So whenever you clip a layer to the layer below, then they will work together in terms of the adjustments that you make to them. Okay, so now what we want to do is, since I don't want this to be a big hard rim light around all of her, I want to selectively limit where that rim light will appear. So I'm going to click on that new layer with the inner glow rim light on it, and I'm going to add a black mask. So bottom of the layers panel down to the add layer mask icon, which is this box with the circle, left click, and what we have is a new empty layer, a new white mask. And I want to, in fact, let me just get rid of that for a moment and show you something you can do here. Let me delete that mask. So as you saw, when you add a new mask, the default is white. So just to save you the step of having to invert that mask, while you're on that layer, hold your Alt or Option key, keep it depressed, do the same thing. Now come to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer mask icon, which is that box with the circle, left click, and look at that. By holding Alt or Option when you do it, you add the black mask and it saves you that extra step of inverting it. Okay, so as you know, in Photoshop, masks are black and white, and anything that is in black will not be affected by any of the adjustments, enhancements, whatever it is you're doing on that layer. Only the things that appear in white will be visible and show the enhancements. So what do we want to do? You see the black is completely hidden the rim light that we added. So to bring back the white rim light selectively, go to your toolbar. Again, yours might be on the left, mine is docked right. Come down to the paintbrush tool, which looks like a little brush, and left click on it to get the black behind it. And then, as I've mentioned in the past, every single tool in Photoshop has its own options and settings that are distinctive to that tool. And the options are always across the top in the options bar. So for the brush tool, let's just be sure we have our options set the way we want. Come over to this little icon that looks like what the brush tip, that simulates the brush tip. Click on that little down arrow, and I like to, because I want a subtle look for the rim light, I'm going to use a soft brush. If you want it to be a harsh, distinctive line, then perhaps you want to bring back the rim light with a hard brush. So just decide for your image. But for mine, I'm going to use the soft brush. I'm going to click up here to close that. I'll come across, again, I am working with a mouse. So I am getting 100% pressure and flow when I work with it. So I am going to lower the flow to somewhere around 30–35%, something like that. So to do that, I'll just left click on the word flow and start dragging and watch the percent go down there till I get to around 30–35 in that general area. Maybe I'll leave it a little more just so it comes back faster for the video. And if you don't want to click on the word and drag, you can click this little down arrow and just slide the slider. Okay, so now I have my brush, which see inside my green highlighter, that white circle is my brush and my brush size. If I use my right, my mouth works well, my right bracket key, I can make that brush bigger. If I use my left bracket key, I can make that brush smaller. So I'm going to bring it up just a little bit. And then I am going to zoom in so you can see what we're doing here. And I'm just going to start brushing along the edge. Make sure that your foreground color over in the bottom of your toolbar is on white. You can, if your foreground is black like mine is, you can either click on this little double-headed arrow or click the X key on your keyboard, and that will flip between the two. So I am going to paint with my paintbrush using white on the black mask, and because I'm painting with white, that's when we'll start bringing back and revealing or showing the rim light. And again, you can just paint, it's not going to bring out more than what you already created in the layer style. So you already set how big the rim light is in that layer style. Now you're only controlling where it actually shows up on your subject. And again, because I have lowered the flow, the more strokes I make with flow, the more it will build up to reveal the rim light more, okay? One other thing I probably should mention, because I do often or mostly work with a stylus and a tablet. If you're using a stylus and a tablet, then you can just control the pen pressure, and so you can keep your flow at 100%, and then just depending on how hard you push or how lightly you touch to the tablet, that will control the, how intensely the rim light is brought back. So again, here I am, just for the logic, trying to separate her shoulder and this coat from the shadowy background with the rim light. So that's where I'm painting here. And again, as I've said, I wouldn't normally for an image like this have it be this intense for the rim light, but because I want to be sure you can see it. Now again, it's sort of dipping in and getting darker here, so I want to separate her from her background, from my logic. And so I'm painting there. Because there's light reflecting up close from this damp ground, there would be some light there. I'm going to stop around her boot. There we go. And then just be sure I'm going to pull, because again, the key light, the main light is over here, and this rim light is here. I want to bring some more of this back too. Okay. So that's where I am painting back in. And let me just show you the mask here. Zoom out, show you the mask. There we go. So you can see where I painted is where that rim light that was created, that the entire rim light is showing on this thumbnail. We are selectively bringing it back by painting white on the black mask. Oh, and the way, if you want to look at your mask, I am pressing Alt or Option and clicking on the mask, and that makes it a toggle. So that is creating the rim light with an inner glow layer style. So let me just show you by clicking on this eye here. This is before and after. So we have gone from no rim light to some rim light. And as I said, you do it to taste. I would have normally for this image done it less, but I wanted you to see it. You can do as much or as little as you want for the effect that you're going for. Okay, so that is the end of demo number 1. I am going to pause the video and set up and get up the image for demo number 2. In demo number 2, I'm going to show a different method for creating rim light, and this one will use curves. So hold on for a moment. This is demo number 2, and in demo number 2 I'm going to show how to create a rim light using curves in Photoshop. And this, as I had mentioned earlier, is a Pexels stock image, and this is one of the images I completely modified by taking it out of its original background and adding black just so it made sense to try to use it for a rim lighting example. So if you do want to look at the link that I'm going to have in the description below the video, and you want to use this same particular image, you would have to select the subject and add a black background if you want to work with it. Other than that, I'd say, maybe just try to work with another image if you want to follow this same kind of process, but with a different image. So as I also said in the introduction, you are not limited to rim lighting people. So you can certainly do objects of various ilks. So let's get started trying to create a rim light where there is none on this image using curves. So as usual, let's duplicate the background layer. This time I'll just use a Control or Command J. while on that background layer, and I will label this to be the background copy. Alternatively, you could click on that background and drag it down to the Add New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, and then work on your copy. All right, so again, the first thing we want to do is select your subject. And so I am going to go to the toolbar and use the object selection tool, which is this box with the arrow. You could also click on the quick selection tool, sorry, and any of the selection tools in order to get the option to select subject at the top of the interface. So where my highlighter is, I'm just going to click on select subject and let Photoshop auto select. Okay, and so now you see the marching ants. Photoshop has made the selection of the subject that it sees, and I'm not going to take the time to modify it in any way, but, you know, because if I was taking time for my own image, I'd be sure everything was just perfect. But for your own image, then you should take the time, look it over, and if you use an automated selection, make sure that it's accurate for what you want to do. Now, I want to, while that selection is active, add a layer mask to this background copy. So go to the bottom of the layers panel to this box with the circle, which is the add new layer mask, and left click on that. And you can see up here on that background copy that we now have a layer mask added. That's the black and white, and it's active because there's the white frame around it. And you can see that it has made the car the white part, so that's what's selected and active and can be operated on using this mask. All right, so now the next thing that we want to do here is to make that selection active again. So Control or Command and just click on there to bring back the marching ants. So now we want to jump, just like we did in the first demo, we want to jump this subject up onto its own layer here in the layers panel. So again, Control or Command J with that selection active. And I'm going to go back to my neutral tool. And just to show you, we have now put the subject up onto its own layer. It's a transparent or empty layer, so all those little white and gray squares are transparencies, so we're good. And let me just call this the car. You can double click on the words there to change the label if you want to. All right, so now that we have the car on its own layer and that layer is active, we want to open a curves adjustment layer. So again, bottom of the layers panel, come to this circle with the line through it, which is the add new adjustment layer, left click on that, and then you get the list of all the different adjustment layers, and we want to come to where it says curves and left click on that to open a curves layer. There we go, it's popped open the curves layer. And now what we want to do is roughly, just for those who are newer, so for each of these adjustment layers, there are properties associated with them. So again, your properties panel might be at the top, mine is at the bottom, just because that's easier for me to visualize things. So associated with that curves is the actual curve in the properties panel. And if you're not familiar with curves, it runs on the x-axis, it runs from the blacks to the whites, or the shadows to the highlights, from left to right. And on the y-axis, it runs from the darks to the lights or the brights, and the blacks to the whites vertically that direction. So if you want to brighten something, you would pull the curve up towards the brights, and that's what we want to do, because the brightness level that we are creating here in the curve, it's what is going to become the rim light. So I usually come to about 2/3 of the way up, click on the curve, and just start pulling it up. And you can go, you know, wherever you want to create, because again, this is what's going to become your rim light. So just bring it up to wherever you feel comfortable with. And I think I'll take mine up to there. Again, I'm going to sort of err on maybe brighter than I might normally, just so you can see what's happening. And you can adjust things on the rest of the curve if you want to too. So, I mean, you can pull it down a little bit that way also, right? So it works just like a normal curve in that regard. So again, this brightness that you choose is what is going to become your rim light. So now we want to change this curves layers blend mode. So in the layers panel right here where it says normal, because that's the default, is the normal is the first blend mode. It's sort of just neutral. It's another way to think of that. So hit the down arrow and you can see all the different blend modes. And if you just mouse over them or hover over them, you'll see how they change the look of your image. We're going to change the blend mode to screen, either screen, let me show you screen, or linear dodge is what I usually like to use. Linear dodge is definitely stronger or more intense, so I'm going to leave mine on screen. So for that curves layer, you have brightened it up and you've changed the blend mode to screen or linear dodge. Okay, so now what we want to do is copy the mask of the subject that we created back on the background copy to this curves layer. So you don't want to have to start all over again creating things, so let's just reuse it. So with holding either the Option or the Alt key and keeping it depressed, left click on this mask of the object or subject that you're working with, and then just drag it up to replace that white layer mask. When it asks if you want to replace it, you say yes. Okay, so now that curve is limited to just on the car, but that's not how we want it. We actually want to invert the mask so that this area surrounding the car is what's going to be bright. So with that mask active, and be sure the white frame is around it for it to be active, come to the Properties panel again for the curves layer and click on Invert. And there, see, now it has inverted it from what it was originally. And now what's being affected by the curve and the screening is the area surrounding the car. Next thing we have to do while still on the same layer is get rid of this little chain link icon. So this link is telling you that anything that's done on this layer will affect the entire image. But if you get rid of this little chain link by left clicking on it, see now it's gone, that means you can operate these two things, the mask and the function you're working with, the adjustment you're working with, independently of each other. So what we want to do is move this brightness around so that it can become the rim light for, in this case, this car. So to move it, we have to use the Move tool from the toolbar. So click on the Move tool. It looks like a cross right there. Make sure the black is behind it. And then what you want to do is you want to, because the brightness is where the white is on the mask, you want to move it down so it's coming down into, in my case, the car, or down into your subject to create the rim light. You can do that with either the up, down, and sideways arrow keys, or you can just click and drag. I personally like to use the arrow keys myself. I think I have more control over it. So I'm just going to start. So watch over in here. So I'm moving, I'm clicking with the right arrow key. So watch as the rim light starts coming into the car as I click, see? Or if you want it to come in from the other side of the car, now I'm clicking with so watch over in this area, because now I'm bringing that brightness in because I'm clicking with the left arrow. So you can see I've brought that brightness from the surrounding area into the car. If it was a person, it would be bringing it into and around the edges of the person. Okay. So I'm getting, and I don't want to go too far in, because again, look at the direction of the light. It's coming from this way. So that means what? If the key light or the main light is over here, then if you had a lighting setup, the rim light would be back over on the same side as the key light. All right, so now I've pushed it over this way a little bit. Now I want to bring some brightness down so that it's going across the top of the car. So I'm going to press the down arrow to bring that brightness down. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So you can see now I've brought some of the rim light around the front by moving the side arrows, and I've brought it down and onto the top of the car. Let me just turn this off and on to show you what's happening. See? The rim light that way. Now, obviously, it hasn't gotten to the back of the car or any of these other areas around the tires where there would be some more rim light. So the way to deal with that is you have to selectively choose part of the image that you want to continue to work with. So I didn't get any rim light here, so I am going to use from the toolbar my rectangular marquee tool. It's the one that looks like little dashed lines in the shape of a rectangle. If you don't see it, you might have the elliptical marquee tool showing. You can just click on that little right-click on that little down arrow because they're typically nested together, and then click on that, or you can just use a lasso and drop it. I like to use the rectangular. So the area I did not get rim light and that I want to add it is over in this area here. So with the mask still active and the white frame around it, I'm going to click and just pull out a selection around this area where I want to get some more rim light. And I'm going to limit it. I don't want it going that far over. So again, in Photoshop, if you make adjustments and you have a selection active, it's only going to get adjusted in the area where the selection is. So you are essentially saying to Photoshop, don't change what I've already done here, only add some rim light to this box that I have created here into the selective area. So then you would go back into the Move tool on the toolbar, click on that cross there for the Move tool, and then I'm going to start working with the arrows again and again. As I said, you could slide it if you want to, just drag it. So I'm clicking my right arrow and pulling some of the brightness from this area over here where it's white. See where it's white on the mask? That's where the brightness will be revealed. Okay. And I might come down just a little bit. Okay, and that's too much for a rim light, but I just wanted you to see it. I'm right-clicking again on the arrow. All right, and then once you add your rim light where it didn't appear originally and you've selectively chosen where to put it, then you do a Control or Command D to get rid of the marching ants. Okay, so now since I did this, it's a problem. So let's go back, and I'm going to turn this off and make a selection that is bigger here, and just so we don't, then go back to the Move tool, and then I'm going to use my arrows again just to scoot a little bit over. Okay, there we go. That's better. All right, and so again, you can see that sometimes you just have to play with it and go back and forth. There's nothing like you can always just go to something on the first thing, on the first attempt, and it's going to work. It's all trial and error to get what you like. All right, so then once you get your rim light added to the places where it was not before, then you do a Control or Command D to get rid of the marching ants. So, and then I'm going to go back to my neutral tool over here. So then let me just show you the before and after. Before and after. Before, no rim light. After, using curves. Okay. So that is essentially the end of demo number 2 in terms of the essential steps for using curves to create a rim light and the steps that you would have to go through. Now, there's a couple things that you'll see on this image. One, I'll tell you an optional thing, and they're both optional, but let me tell you if it happens to yours too. So optionally, for an image like this, because you've got the rim light, you might want to do something like go into Photoshop's lighting effects, which is found under Filter, Render, okay, and add some kind of a spotlight or a directional light or a universal light to your scene, because then it would better explain, why there's room lighting there too. So again, this is an optional thing. I'm not going to do it. But what I will say is I'll include links in the description to my two-part video workshop on how to relight photos in Photoshop. Definitely check out part number 1 because it discusses how to deal with Adobe ending 3D effects like lighting effects in Photoshop. So if on your version that you're using you don't see the lighting effects anymore, that's because Adobe has discontinued it. They were threatening to do it for a while. But in my part 1 video, in the link that I'm going to include the link to, it will tell you what to do or what option that you have to get it back if you want to keep another version of Photoshop running on your system also. Now, another thing that you'll notice, and again, this is an optional thing and it may or may not affect your image. If you look at my before and after, by doing the curves and the lightening, it has also lightened up the rest of this scene, which I really didn't want it to particularly do. I sort of like a little bit of the light, but it then makes it look like not right here. So if something like that happens and it relights other parts of your image that you don't want it to, again, optionally, you can come to the bottom of the layers panel to the add adjustment layer icon, circle with the line, and I'm going to come down to exposure, left click on that, and again, I think what I'm going to do is so you've got a new exposure layer with the mask active and the white frame around it. In the properties panel for that layer, I am going to invert the mask so that it's black. Okay, and then well, let me tell you what, I'm going to do that later. I'm going to throw that away. So I'm going to lower the exposure first. So in the properties panel, just so I can see it here, for that layer, I am going to lower the exposure slider. So look at the image, and I'm lowering it from where it got brightened up to what it looks like pretty good for me. And then I'm going to also just do a little bit of gamma just to make it a little bit richer. And then I am going to add a black, so alter option and click on the black mask. So I just hid that exposure layer. And then, and again, I'm not working with these masks because I don't want to affect the rim light that we created. So I'm just going to take my paintbrush tool from the toolbar, make sure the foreground color is white, and with the mask active and the frame around it, I'm going to use my right bracket key and make my brush a little bit larger, and then I'm just going to paint some of this darker ground back in again. Okay, and I'm not going near the rim light, and that's why I'm doing it this way versus trying to invert something that might impact the rim light. Okay, so that then is the end of my demo number 2, showing how to create a rim light with curves. In the final demo number 3, I will show how to create rim light with channels. And so again, I will pause while I set up the image for that demo. This is demo number 3, and in this demo we're going to create rim light using channels. Okay, and again, this is a stock image from Pexels, and the link if you want to try to work with this image will be in the description below the video. And again, you can see she's in a relatively darkened scene with this bright orange backlit circle behind her, so it makes some sense to have a rim light coming around her given how she's lit. And again, you can see it looks like she's probably lit at about a 45-degree angle, probably with a fairly height. It looks like the light would have probably been on a light stand higher than her head given the angle that the light is coming from. And I see it looks like there's some light in her eyes there, so it looks like there's something up there that is reflecting. Okay, so what we want to do as usual is duplicate the background layer. So this time again, you can either do a Control or Command J with this background active, or drag this layer to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, which is the box with the plus, and get the background copy. And now we're going to go to the channels panel. So here right next to my layers tab is the channel tab. I will click on that to open the channels panel. If you don't see a tab for channels, if it's not visible, then go to the top of your interface to the Windows menu, come down to where it says channels and click on it, and that way you should open that panel up. When it opens, what you'll see here is that we have this composite RGB layer or channel, as well as separate red, green, and blue color channels. What you want to do is Control or Command plus click on this composite RGB channel here. So I'll do that. And you'll notice that now there are some marching ants, and Photoshop has made a selection of the luminosity in my image. So it's going to differ depending on whatever image that you are working with. So how much is selected varies by the luminance values that in your image. So 255 would be the most, 0 would be none. So now with that luminance selection active, you want to go to the bottom of the channels panel, click on the box with the plus, which is to add new channel icon. Left click there, and you'll see we've added a new alpha channel, and it still has the active selection on it. Again, I like to do the same thing I do in the layers panel. So while it's still active, just let's left click over here, not on the words, and just drag it down to that same add new channel icon, and let's work on the copy. So once you have that copy active, then we want to fill that luminosity selection, which is alpha 1 copy, with white. So to do that, press Shift and Backspace or Delete. And I mean, there are different shortcut keys, but this is the one I like to use because then I just see the various options. And so this is my preference. If you want to look it up, there are other shortcuts you can do either with Control or Command or Alt or Option, but I just like to do this and get all my options at once. So I said we're going to fill this with white. So for contents, let's just click the down arrow, and I could either choose background color, which if you look at my toolbar is white, or else white. All right, and then click OK. So now it has on this alpha 1 copy, and you can see what's happened here on the image, filled it with white. So now you can either use levels or curves to make this brighter, because again, this is what's going to become the rim light. And so I'm going to just work with levels. If you want to work with curves, do a Control or Command and the letter M as in Mary. And I was going to say it's like M curves and the M is silent or something. I don't know why they picked M. But anyway, so it's a Control or Command M if you want to work with curves. I'm going to do Control or Command L to bring up a levels adjustment here. And I want to make this the luminosity here even brighter so that it will be a very distinctive visible rim light, at least for seeing on the video. So again, here is the levels. So it's a normal histogram with the shadows, midtones, and highlights, and you can pull these little handles in whatever direction. So if we pull the right handle, which is for the whites, the brights, to the left, it's going to make things bright. Look at that. See, I'll just do it dramatically so you can see. Okay, so I'm going to make that brighter that way. You can pull in some of these others a little bit, but I just want to make it quite bright, even if it's not, again, realistically what I would do, just so you can see the impacts of the rim light that we're working with. And then once you get it where you lighten to the brightness you want by working with those handles, then click OK, and it's been accepted back to this alpha 1 copy. Optionally, you can also paint with the brush tool from the toolbar to enhance the white. So let's do it just to show that we can do it. So again, on the toolbar, yours might be left, come down to the brush tool, which looks like a paintbrush, left click on it, come to the bottom of the toolbar, and again, and make sure you're painting with white. So you can either click on this two-headed arrow or press the X key. And then with the brush tool active, I'm going to since I'm working with a mouse and it's going to put it at really high intensity, 100%, I'm going to lower this to about 30 or 40%. if you're working with a stylus and a tablet, you could leave it at 100% because then you would just control how much you're laying down with the pen pressure that you use. So I'm just going to paint over this a little bit and brighten it up just a little bit more so it's obvious what's happening when we add the rim light. Okay, oh, that's a little bit much. All right. All right, so you can just paint where you want to brighten it up, but again, that's optional. You don't need to do that step, but I'd rather show you and you not lose it, okay? So now the next thing we want to do is when we're at the desired brightness and the luminosity selection is still active, like it is, you can see the marching ants are there, then we want to go back up. Let me put this on my neutral tool here and click on the composite RGB channel. There we go. So you can see it relights all of these, keeps the selection, and now we want to go back to the layers panel. So just come back to this other layers tab, left click on that. Now we're back in the layers panel. So now we want to, with that selection still active, add a new layer. So we're going to go to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, the box with the plus, click. We've got this new layer, and what this layer is representing, what we set for in their channels there was and what we selected and worked with was the luminosity or brightness of what our rim light is going to be. Okay, so that's the luminosity or brightness channel. Now we want to fill that layer with white. So again, we're going to use our shift, backspace, or delete. Again, fill with white, click OK, and look at how much brighter it made everything, okay? So now we want to deselect the marching ants now that we've gotten the luminosity and the brightness set. It's Control or Command D to get rid of some of that. See, the marching ants are now gone. All right, now we want to, the next step is to create a new layer below this luminosity layer. And that layer is what's going to be the rim light. This is the brightness for it, and then that's the rim light. So another little trick, rather than having to just click add a new layer and then drag it, you can, with this layer active, press on the, I may have to think of my shortcuts here, Control or Command, and then click on the Add New Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. So Control or Command, bottom of the Layers panel, Add New Layer icon, and then look, how cool is that? It puts it below the layer that you are on. And then this is going to be the rim light layer. Well, it helps if you can spell. Rim light. Okay. Okay, so now with the background layer cut, so we've got that, we'll come back to it. So with this background copy highlighted and active, now I want, sorry, my mind is just gapping here. Let me just take a drink of water. Okay, with this layer copy, sorry, I needed a drink, it's gotten hot here. With this layer active, we want to select the subject. So again, I'm going to use my object selection tool from the toolbar, and I'm going to click on Select Subject. So again, you can use any of the selection tools to select subject. So again, Photoshop has done an automated selection around this woman. And I want to go back here to the rim light layer, because what I want to do is put the selection of her as a layer mask. So we're only putting the rim light on her. Sorry, it's getting hot here. It's been in the hundreds, so my brain is slowing down. All right, so with this rim light layer active, bottom of the layers panel, add a layer mask based on this active selection. And again, any automated selection, just check it first to make sure it's accurate. Go to the Add Layer Mask, which is the box with the circle, and now we have the selection of her that we're going to use for the rim lighting. And again, the subject that you want to add the rim light to should be white, and the rest of the mask should be black. And so the enhancements are going to be coming onto her body and not onto the background. Okay, so now we want to click on the layer thumbnail, make sure the layer thumbnail of this rim light layer is active. So mine already is, with the white frame around it. So just be sure yours is. And we want to fill this layer with black. So again, Shift, Backspace, or Delete. This time we're going to fill with black. Okay, click OK. So now you can see it's darkened her up. So don't worry about it. We're not going to leave her all dark like that. So we're going to use a blend mode to bring her back. So in the layers panel, come down to where the blend modes are, which is in, if you click on next to the word normal on that little arrowhead, come down, you can use the screen blend mode to bring back the highlights and the luminosity and make sure she's not all dark like that, okay? So now we're going to go back to our luminosity and brightness layer, the layer right above the rim light. And we're going to add a completely black mask. So again, we're sort of going through the same steps, but just with different tools, in the sense that we're controlling where the rim light is going to be, and we will paint it back selectively. So with this luminosity, brightness, in other words, what's the top layer right now, active, come to the bottom of the layers panel, and we want to add a black mask. So Alter Option, click on the Add Layer Mask icon, and so we've just hidden what we've done. So it should look just like, see, I'm just clicking the eyes on and off. So it looks just like the starting image at this point. For all intents and purposes, it should look back like your starting image. So now on this luminosity and brightness layer, we want to clip it to the layer before. Remember in my other demo I talked about clipping, because we want to be sure that wherever we are painting in rim light, it'll just affect the rim light layer. So pressing Alt or Option, and your little mouse, you see where the little pointer finger is in my layers panel, start a little bit lower and slowly move up towards the line between those two layers, see? And when you get that box with the down arrow, just click, and now this luminosity layer is linked or clipped to the rim light layer. So you will be making sure that where you paint, we'll be putting the rim light on those parts, and the brightness and the luminosity of the rim light that you wanted onto your subject. So now we're going to paint on this black mask. So be sure the black mask is active with the white frame around it. With the toolbar, be sure that you have a brush tool active, so it looks like a paintbrush, and be sure that you have white as your foreground color. And then you can start painting with this. And the white brush is my brush size, and that's a little bit bigger, so let me zoom in just a bit so I can see where I'm painting. And I'm going to make, with the left bracket key, the brush a little bit smaller. Got white as my foreground color, brush active. We're painting on the mask. So I'm just going to start painting in and watch the figure where the white is coming back, okay? And I'm just, that's a little bit intense. I'm going to lower the flow. So I'm just bringing back the rim light and the luminosity of where I want the rim light to be. I'll put a little bit on her necklace. And you can see this has a very different look with this approach than the very harder lights, or controllably harder lights, for the other approaches that I showed you. Sorry, I'm looking where I'm painting here. Okay, and let me just show you the mask so you can see this is where I painted. Now if it's too much, you can lower the opacity a little bit too. Okay. But you just paint in selectively where you want your rim light to appear. Now, for me, I would say that this is more of a kicker light effect than a harsh rim light because it tends to give more dimension and it goes more into the surface of the subject versus just a rim light. But some people use the terms interchangeably, and as you saw even on my example images in the introduction, the woman with the really super curly hair, the light was coming more into her than being just a very harsh rim light. So I just wanted to show you different approaches or different styles of rim light that can be created with different tools in Photoshop. But as I said, this kind of a rim lighting will give more dimension to the surface of the subject versus just the rim. So let me just, again, see what we've done. So we added pretty harsh rim light to that. So if you want to stop there, you certainly can. Let me put these back to neutrals so I don't forget where I am, because that is the rim lighting effect that is created with using channels. However, optionally, if you don't want this to be this bright glaring white in this, again, after having done your analysis right up front before you start, you see that unlike the first image in the first demo, this one is very warm hued or warm toned, color toned. It's got the yellows and the reds and the oranges. So in your rim lighting, you might want to pick up on that ambient color and bring that more into your rim light so it doesn't look like she, just is about to faint from white light here. So to add some color to the rim light and give it almost more of a gel effect or make it look like there's a reflection from the surroundings, you can go to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new adjustment layer icon, which is that circle with the line, click on that and come down to color balance. Where am I here? Color balance. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, color balance. And we get in the properties for that color balance, you'll see that you can adjust where you're putting the color tones. And this little down arrow will let you choose shadows, midtones, or highlights. I think I'll start with highlights since that's what we're dealing with here. And then you can just drag the sliders. So obviously if I'm going more warm toned, I'm going to go more towards the yellow, and there's some reds in here, so I'm going to go more towards the reds. So depending on what colors you have in your background and you want to, or you doesn't have to match your background. If you just want to look like you're putting a creative gel onto somebody with the rim lighting, then just pull it towards the colors that you want, and you can do it individually for the highlights, midtones, and shadows. They're isolated. So I'm going to pull this yellow slider and watch the image. Say it's warming it up a little bit. And then I'm going to pull a little bit of red, since maybe I'll pull this up, zoom in so you can see more. Okay, I'm not going to do any magenta green, and that was the highlights. Let me maybe just do a little bit on the midtones too, and so you'll see it resets to 0. So you're adjusting each of those individually. Red, a little bit of red. Yeah, see, so that warms it up and it warms up the background some more, so it is consistent. And if you want it to only affect the rim light versus, so that's why you do the clipping. This is affecting the entire image. If you let me turn that off and on. So if you only want it to apply to the rim lighting, then you have to do this same kind of link or clipping kind of thing. So press Alt or Option and just slowly move up until it's between the lines, and you get that little box with the down arrow and clip it, and then it's just affecting the highlights and the rim lighting and warming it up a little bit. Okay, so that is, as I said then, the end of demo number 3, which showed how to create rim light from channels. I apologize for some of the pauses, but it's really hot here so today, unfortunately. So that was the end of this workshop. So just by way of recap, I showed you 3 methods to create rim light in Photoshop when you have no starting rim light. The methods were in demo 1, the inner glow, demo 2 using curves, and demo 3 channels. And my goal here is, and they got progressively, I think, more complex too, and that's why I did them in the order that I did them. But my goal is to showcase various approaches so that you have options depending on the image that you work with and the look that you want to create. One or the other of these might work better for you. The other thing is, as I said, nothing is formulaic, so don't feel wedded to the settings I use specifically for these images and feel you have to use them on yours. If you want to start with those settings, great, but then I'd say just experiment and see, how it works. And if you want to modify the settings, feel free to explore different styles and different approaches and different settings. As I said also up front, explore different styles of photography in terms of what can be appropriate for rim lighting. But if you're a digital artist, then also try it for illustrations, for shapes. You can even use it on type, so you can just really go wild with it and have a lot of fun. So take care, and hope you enjoy working with rim light.